University of Tampere. Currently, actually, we are experiencing the darkest days of the Finnish winter. Luckily, there is some sun around, and we have fantastic colleagues from all over Europe to join us for this meeting and also for the Gala conference. Moreover, we have a giant in the learning sciences field, Professor Roger Azevedo, with us today, and we will start the day with his workshop on how games can be utilized to address grand challenges. Before leaving in the stage, I would like to provide a brief background on him. But his long-standing academic achievement is beyond the limits of my memory, so I will read his background from the paper. Dr. Azevedo is a professor in the School of Modeling and Simulation and Training at the University of Central Florida. He is also an affiliated faculty in the Departments of Computer Science and Internal Medicine at the University of Central Florida and the lead scientist for the Learning Sciences Faculty Cluster Initiative. He received his PhD in Educational Psychology from McGill University and completed his postdoctoral training in cognitive psychology at Carnegie Mellon University. His main research area includes examining the role of cognitive, metacognitive, affective, and motivational self-regulatory processes during learning with advanced learning technologies, for example, intelligent tutoring systems, hypermedia, multimedia, simulations, serious games, and immersive virtual learning environments. More specifically, his overarching research goal is to understand the complex interactions between humans and intelligent learning systems by using interdisciplinary methods to measure cognitive, metacognitive, emotional, motivational, and social processes and their impact on learning, performance, and transfer. To accomplish his goal, he conducts laboratory, classroom, and institute studies and collects multi-channel data to develop models of human-computer interaction, examines the nature of temporally unfolding self and other regulatory processes, and designs intelligent learning and training systems to detect, track, model, and foster learners, teachers, and trainers' self-regulatory processes. He has published over 300 peer-reviewed papers, chapters, and refereed conference proceedings in the areas of educational, learning, cognitive, and computational sciences. He was the former editor of the Metacognition and Learning Journal and serves on the editorial board of several top-tier learning and cognitive sciences journals, such as Applied Cognitive Psychology, International Journal of AI in Education, Educational Psychology Review, and European Journal of Psychological Assessment. I will not list the fundings he has received. Just imagine a Pac-Man who got everything on the way. Dear Roger, we are so happy to have you today. The stage is yours. Please welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Magno. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful intro, William, and also to you and Christian for inviting me to also be doing the keynote and to be here and present with you this morning. Sorry, I'm fighting a little bit of a jet lag. I thought went to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening and got up at 1 in the morning. So I got like a whole 5 hours, and I've been fighting sleep ever since. So I'm going to do my best being highly caffeinated, okay? So hopefully that works. So it's going to be great to spend the rest of the day with you, and then especially the next 3 hours. So what I planned for the next 3 hours is a little bit of kind of didactic, share a little bit of what we do some thought-provoking questions. Hopefully there's going to be some hands-on activity also, so we can get feedback on one of the games that we are currently collaborating with colleagues at the University of Idaho. For those of you who don't know Idaho is one of our least forgotten states in the U.S. It's kind of northeastern, somewhere in the mountains. Not much happens there, very small population. But so those are collaborators, and then we'll kind of open it up to questions, and then looking forward to, first of all, if we can go around also and kind of at least briefly introduce yourself. Not that I'm going to remember all your names, but at least I want to get a good sense of who you are: faculty, grad students, postdocs, game developers, etc. So maybe we can start over here, if you don't mind, please.
I'm Professor Jonathan Shaw from Coventry University in the UK, and I'm Director of Educational Innovation and Technology.
Yep.
Mark Lewis from Coventry University. I'm a research assistant in the Centre for Post-Digital Cultures.
Hello, Carlos from University of Strasbourg in France. I'm specialized in the development of assessment protocols using technology.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Richard. I'm from University of a research associate, and I work at the EU-FairPlay project.
Hi, Matthias from Dresden as well, Dresden Center for Open Digital Innovation and Participation. Also a research assistant there, a research associate there, and also a member of the EU-FairPlay
Institute of Tübingen University, and I'm also new to the EU-FairPlay project, and I will be directing mainly networking and research activities. Nice to meet you here.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Helga Hirvonen. I'm from Tampere. I work here at the Tampere University in critical project. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Petros Lameras. I'm from Coventry University. I'm an associate professor at the Ludic Design Center for Post-Digital Touches. I'm doing research on AI and games.
My name is Rodolfo. I'm from Brazil.
Bom dia.
I'm in Austria at the moment, University of Adress, as a guest researcher. But I'm researching psychology, motivation, emotional engagement, and game-based learning.
Yeah, my name is Manon Linaus. I'm a tenure track professor at the University of Graz, where I currently host Rodolfo, and I'm focusing on game-based learning.
I'm Michiel Kickman. I'm currently with St. Gallen University of Teacher Education, and I'm focusing on intelligent methods for competence diagnostics assessments, adaptive assessments, and specifically assessment in games, within smart games.
Hello, I'm Christian Kiili from here at Tampere University. I work here as a professor of game-based learning, and I'm focusing on administrative stuff.
Stuff.
And some research also.
My name is Nadine Lange. I'm also working for the University of Teacher Education in Switzerland, and I'm working as a career counselor.
Okay.
You've already introduced yourself. So. I'm Pather. Pather Callahan. I'm from the University of Tallinn in Estonia, and I lecture on the MSc program that they have there on digital learning game design.
I'm Martina. I'm working at the Chemnitz University of Technology, and I recently joined the FairPlay project also.
Hi, I'm Marcus. I'm also working at the University of Technology in Chemnitz. Yeah, I'm actually the project lead of the EU-FairPlay project. Yeah, kind of new, I guess. It's 1 year working.
Hello, I'm Muhtaram. I'm a tenure track professor in game-based learning at Tampere University, and I joined Christian's team last spring. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Morning, everybody. My name is Mikhail. I'm based at Tallinn University in Estonia, where we, together with kind of Patrick, teach the digital learning games program. At the moment, I'm focusing on staying awake and not integrating.
You're not alone.
Yeah, we took the overnight ferry. Not the most luxurious experience, but
focus. No, just kidding. Focus.
Anyway, so in addition to game-based learning, I'm also interested in the sort of participatory culture, grassroots activism dimension of game making outside of the formal institutionalized game industry, and that was the topic I defended my doctoral dissertation on literally 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Hello everybody, my name is Juho Siuko. I work here in Tampere University. I'm also working as a researcher in the critical project and doing my PhD about game-based learning and epistemic emotions. Nice to meet you all.
Hello, my name is Antti Koskinen. I work in Tampere University, currently finalizing my PhD, and the subject is game-based learning and focusing on instructional support and adaptation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for introducing yourselves, and look for more interactions throughout the day and throughout the week. So yeah, so I start off with a little bit of an overview. There's a lot packed, but we can be flexible. That's part of the work that we do, is being a self-regulated learner. So if we need to change things, so we start off with talk about why societal challenges. The societal challenge that we talked about actually with Mutram and Christian before coming here is that there are many societal challenges. The one we're going to focus on is STEM learning, and why STEM learning is extremely important, and why use digital games for STEM learning. right? The issues related to these grand challenges with game-based learning environments, a little bit of an overview of what we know about game-based learning environments that comes from different disciplines, educational psychology, learning sciences, instructional psychology, AI, engineering, etc. And then I'll sprinkle a lot more of that during my keynotes on Thursday, right? We really want to focus on is, as we think about designing game-based learning environments or societal changes, really going to focus is on some of these issues. What are the pedagogical issues? What are the, and then I'm going to focus specifically on self-regulated learning, because that is the research that I do. How many of you are familiar with self-regulated learning, or have heard of self-regulated learning as a theoretical framework? Right, so about half of you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means, right? And also, of course, if you look at the literature in game-based learning environments, there's a lot of work on engagement, or people think they're doing engagement. I'm going to just be a little bit provocative, because as a trained psychologist, when we go to places and people say, oh yeah, students look really engaged, first question that comes to mind as a psychologist, so what is your operational definition of engagement? How do you know? How do you measure engagement, right? What is the evidence for engagement? It's not just, yeah, I felt like they were engaged. That's not science, okay? And then the other one is that you see a lot in game-based learning about agency. So we talk a lot about agency. We have to give agency to the learner, okay? But not all learners are ready, right, and willing to engage in making good instructional decisions. So too much agency can actually backfire, okay, when it comes to instructional effectiveness, et cetera, and competence. We'll talk about what are some of the research strategies that have been used and what are some of the ones that we should be looking at. Learning outcomes, how do we measure learning from game-based learning environments, okay? And a lot of the literature that you see there also focus on self-report measures. Again, this is a beef that I have with the literature, right? Because self-report measures are easy to administer, but what do they actually measure, okay? And this is coming from the literature in self-regulated learning, where about 20 years ago, so myself, people like Maria Bannert at TUM, people like Dragan Gasevic, people like Sanna Jarvala, okay, at Oulu, and others, okay, started questioning, Phil Winnie started questioning the fact that, well, let's not throw self-reports out completely, but self-report measures report what the student's perception of what they think they are and what they think they're doing. If we really want to look at it, what we need to focus on is multimodal, multi-channel data, okay, which some of us in this audience are experts in, right? Okay, so what does eye tracking give you? What is physiology? For those of you who are interested in physiology, Mudrums is basically one of the leading researchers in this particular area, okay, and also his former colleagues at University of Oulu here in Finland, okay? So eye tracking, log files, physiology, facial expressions of emotion, all right? For students using, let's say, Newton's Playground, which is Valerie Schutz's system at Florida State University. Does A4, does this mean that I'm always confused? Okay, is this A4 representation for universal for all humans? Okay, all right, so we'll talk about some of those issues. And then the question becomes, what should be the design features for game-based learning environments if we're going to use multimodal data and other approaches of detecting fluctuations in students' self-regulated processes? We'll do a little bit of hands-on activity. This game is called Outbreak Simulator. This is the collaboration I was telling you with the University of Idaho, with computer science and biology and the game designers. We have a spreadsheet, then we'll have an open discussion, and then also an open discussion about the activity. So that's kind of the plan for today, but we also can be very flexible and adaptive, okay? And I don't want to make this a 3-hour monologue, okay? The whole purpose of having workshop is to have some interaction, okay? That's okay? All right, as I'm fighting jet lag. All right, so it looks like your project really focuses on grand societal challenges. We focus on many societal challenges, especially being a Portuguese Canadian American living in the U.S. Okay, we live there. That's my home. Has been my home for over 20 years now. Okay. And you probably hear through the news that we have a lot of societal challenges that we're dealing. You're probably dealing with them also here in Europe. Our biggest ones are issues like crime, infectious diseases such as COVID. Right, we have a lot of people who are still vaccine hesitant. Okay, don't believe in science. Let me just put it out there. We think the world is flat. Okay, so some scary stuff. Right, a lot of crime. You hear about all the shootings. We practically have a shooting every day in our society, which is extremely terrible. Okay. Systemic racism runs rampant in our country. Okay, still does. We have not eradicated that. Okay, and meanwhile, we're trying to figure out other issues like climate change. Depends on who our president is, right? If we swing one way to the other. No, we don't believe in climate change. The other one's like, yeah, let's do something about climate change because that's our responsibility to the world, right? So those are some of the issues, right, the challenges. But what I'll also take an opportunity is to figure out which challenges are you dealing with in your projects. Is it some that are listed there? Or are there other ones? So this is really the interactive component, so I'm not just talking, giving a talk.
On the very first one, I'm in the cybersecurity area.
Cybersecurity, okay, yep. So crime and cybersecurity. So we have, in our School of Modeling and Simulation and Training, most of the research goes on is military-based because we have all 5 branches, well now 6 branches. Thanks for our former president. We now have a space force, yes. Not the comedy show, it's an actual force. We actually met with our officials, but yes. So most of it is around cybersecurity, right? The national NSA is also near our campus. And yeah, what else?
So climate change and environmental topics seem to be quite prominent as of late.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a couple of projects, one relating to using game-based learning in sort of middle, high school STEM education with an environmental focus, and another one more specifically about game design programs and
Mm-hmm.
sort of raising awareness about the complicity and the role of the game industry as such in climate change.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, what else?
I guess health literacy
Okay.
is one issue. Recently we have been collaborating with a company in Finland developing a game to develop vaccine awareness,
Mm-hmm.
funded by the World Health Organization, and then in that game students were playing how the stem cells works and what's the point of vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess health literacy is one aspect.
Okay, very good. All right. Very good. Okay. And so you can see that any of these, right, could be the themes of, and like the examples you gave, the themes for, they can all be couched in terms of if we're trying to get students to learn about STEM, because all of these have some STEM component, right? And not to be biased, it should also not just be STEM, but it could also be STEAM, because arts, of course, arts and humanities are also involved in game design, right? And that's a critical features that we sometimes forget by just focusing on STEM. The other part of also STEM in terms of the work that we do is that we also, the M can also sometimes be a double M, right? It could be math, of course, that's the default value, but it could also be medicine. So some of the work, we do have a College of Medicine, we have a College of Nursing, we have a College of Health Profession and Sciences, and we have the biomedical faculty. So some of that is also the training of future healthcare providers, right? So can we use games, for example, for anesthesia? How do you deliver anesthesia? Sorry?
Snow World.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Or how do you teach people? So we have one project which is developing a VR system for empathy training for young clinicians and aging clinicians also, right? So our first target is medical student, first-year medical students, right? When you have an 18-year-old who has not had much life experience, how do we prepare that clinician to deal with empathy, especially in end-of-life scenarios? So we deal with critical care. So for example, we have a lot of pools in Florida. So in the summer, it's really terrible because you have children drowning. So if you have a child that drowns, they got to bring them into the emergency room at a hospital, right? They try to resuscitate the child. So we're basically building an environment where we can simulate that whole resuscitation room in an emergency room where you are resuscitating the pediatric child. You may have the parents in the room, right? And so the question is, can we use sensors to detect the fact that the medical team is not being very empathetic through what they're saying, what they're showing, and what they're doing, right? And can we distill all that in terms of computer vision machine learning? And then can we deliver just-in-time training to the medical professional, the team leader, who's now going to deliver the bad news to the parents that their child has died, okay? And then, so training them how to deliver that bad news, right? And then the question is not only that, but it's delivering the bad news across cultural, because it could be a Hispanic-speaking family, okay? Who doesn't speak English? So now you have linguistic and cultural barriers to go through, not to mention the bad news, okay? Yeah, so that's some of the work that we do. So obviously we know we're here and it's important, right? So then the big question is, So let's talk, because we're going to talk a lot about self-regulated learning. So how much do you know? So in terms of those of you who put up your hand about self-regulation, what is self-regulation? You better get this right. No, I'm just kidding. No pressure.
I might know something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So why self-regulated learning is a theoretical framework and not, like Piaget's cognitive disequilibrium, or, to go to conferences and everybody, even we're doing game-based learning environments, oh, we use Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. It's like, wow, you do? Okay, how do you measure the ZDP? Right? Or we use Piaget's, cognitive disequilibrium. Really? How do you know when a learner is going through a simulation accommodation? Can you actually detect that's happening? Right? But what is self-regulation?
Well, basically, it emphasizes the agentic perspective on the learning. The learner takes initiative and puts a conscious effort on the learning process.
Yep.
And maybe what makes self-regulated learning different than other models or theories is that it's more operational and possible to measure. That the current understanding allows us to detect specific phases of self-regulation, let's say planning, monitoring, strategic regulation, and strategic application. In this case, it's a more operational learning framework.
Okay, yep, thank you so much.
Is it only about measuring, or is it also about actually trying to apply what you've measured? So I suppose this is the next phase, isn't it?
That's the next phase, yeah.
But then
Yeah.
how are you going to apply what the metrics have told you? This is another kind of institutional problematic, I think, because you need to convince your institution that these are real data and you can apply those as well.
Yeah, it's real data and it's hard data to collect, so that's why they basically, I'm just put it out there. What are they going to fire me at my university for saying this? It's like they like to collect data that's easy to collect, and that's completely, for the most part, completely meaningless and non-useful, right?
How are you going to have some impact?
Yeah.
You do the measurements for being able to have some impact for your institution and your students.
Sure.
Self-regulated learning is not something that, of course, you can research, but then how are you going to enact it in practice?
Yeah, so and that will be a theme throughout this morning at least, is in terms of a learning theory, self-regulation, treating self-regulation as a learning theory, basically, as Mudram was saying, is basically we're focusing on, it's a temporal dynamic process, right, that unfolds in real time. So think about a learner or two learners or three learners using a game-based learning environment. It's that process basically that includes cognition, which is the strategy use, right? Metacognition, how do I know that this NPC is actually giving me information that I need? Okay. Emotions, right? Why am I getting frustrated? Because I can't find a path or the solution. I can't solve this mystery in this game, okay, for example. And then the motivation, which unfortunately our motivation research is still focusing heavily on self-report measure, right? How do I know I am still interested in learning about microbiology with this game environment? Okay, so things like interest, task value. A lot of the problems that we have with STEM, especially with younger kids, is they don't understand why they need to learn about microbiology. Why do I need to learn about thermodynamics? Okay, etc. Okay, so as part of it is a lack of maturity also on the learner's perspective, developmentally mature. Okay, so it's a question is, as what we do is basically study the fluctuations. So the dynamic deployment of cognition, affect, metacognition, motivation. So the CAMS, C-A-M-M. Sometimes we use social interactions because depending if it's two students working together with a game, or it could be two students or even a single student using with embedded avatar or an NPC, etc. Okay, so we look for those fluctuations and what do they mean in terms of what you're doing now, what you're going to be doing later, etc. And there's the problem that we have is that there are too many models of self-regulated learning, all right, because they come from cognitive psychology, learning sciences, affective computing, so engineering, so people like Rosalind Picard, who is the mother or grandmother, I guess, she would slap me probably if I said grandmother, but the mother of affective computing, okay, even emotions. Okay, then we of course have other folks like Reinhard Peckrun, okay, from Munich, right, with this CVT model, the control value theory model, which is one of the dominant models of emotions, but that's still based on self-report. But we can still reconceptualize that, the control and value, in terms of how we design a game and how we induce a student to either have more control or find less value in what they're doing. But those are just two of the processes. Okay, so we'll talk about some of those. So the question becomes, so you're all invested, like I am, right, in terms of game-based learning environments, right? So, but have we asked, why not other some other technology. What is so special about a game-based learning environment that we're all here today for today and this week for the conference? Right? Because I go to the ITS conference, and that's just intelligent tutoring systems. We hardly hear about games, right? I go to AI Ed conference. That's mostly, again, intelligent tutoring system conference. Okay? Or the learning sciences. Well, we'll see a little bit of games, a little bit of intelligent tutoring systems, VR, right? So really kind of an open question. Why games? Why have we chosen games to be what we're focusing on, and especially in dealing with societal challenges? The grand challenge for us as researchers. Yes, sir.
I suppose because it triggers intrinsic motivation of people, of learners.
Okay. All right. And then the next question is that we'll follow up with is how do we know it triggers that? All right. What is it that the designer is using to trigger that intrinsic motivation based on good theories and models? Right. Once you are able to induce it, to trigger it, how do we know that it actually does what you intended to do? How do we measure, right? And yeah, absolutely, yeah. I guess the next versions will be, a USB connector to the. Well, one of the new dependent variables will be the synthesis, the amount of dopamine that is being released. No, I'm just teasing, but still, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And then does it fluctuate? And then if it fluctuates, how do we know when to intervene in the game, right? Are we going to use some kind of AI method, right? Is it based on the multimodal data? It's like, oh, the student's interest, you said interest, has all of a sudden taken a dive. Do we know why it has taken a dive? Or is it sustained, right? And if it's sustained, then do we just back off? Let that student do what they're doing with a game-based learning environment, right? And then does something else take over? Is there another motivational variable? Okay, let somebody else have a hand. Mm-hmm.
I think also like the context you mentioned earlier.
Context.
Sometimes you don't know like why I should learn about molecular biology, but games can provide a, in that moment, relevant context where this information is key to reach a certain goal.
Sure. Okay. And how do we get to that though?
I recently heard a very interesting keynote from David Sander, who is in Switzerland, and he made it all about, actually it was affectivism, or the rise of affectivism in cognitive psychology, and he made the case of, there are no emotions. It's like just making things relevant, and people find those things more relevant, and then that this is the origin of everything.
Okay, yeah.
Which was quite interesting in terms of game-based learning, because you make this context, or you provide the context where this information, this particular information is relevant in how to measure it.
Yeah.
Might be sort of a correlation between emotion and motivation as well as engagement. So that might be something quite relevant.
Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely. But something you said that was interesting is, the both of you said, but how do we know, how does a student know whether something is even relevant? If you're a young student who has limited educational experience, right, or you can even be a college student, right, it's like, oh, I think I want to go into psychology. Oh, I take this research methods class. Oh, okay. Well, like, look, this class has a game to teach me about research methodology, which actually, one of my former, chair of the department, Art Gracer, who just retired, right, they had this thing called Aries, right, to train students. It was a game-based environment for training students about research methods. It was something that we consider very boring, but very foundational to psychology, right? How does a student who's never taken a research methods class, how would they know if what they're doing is relevant, right?
Do they have to know that? If it is well-designed game and you are processing all the relevant stuff.
Yeah, but see, you're both saying, you're both following, I love it. When you say you're relevant, so as somebody who studies self-regulation, the reason I know something is instructionally or educationally relevant to me is because I've already engaged in a metacognitive process to determine that, right? But we'll continue with that. Yeah, absolutely. What else?
I don't think they do. As in, they might in another 5 or 10 years once they know what their career path has conspired to be.
Yep.
Because you might have one goal in mind, and if you're pursuing that goal, it seems relevant, and that's
Mhm.
all good.
Yep.
But things happen.
Absolutely. So two very important things I think that you're both, all four of you now.
The third one might be, if we're talking about formal education, then obviously it's through the learning outcome. So that is, how
Mhm.
they actually know what they're doing. And if we're talking about, the other one is if we're talking about constructivism and social constructivism, then
Mhm.
they have to actually explore this by themselves.
Yeah. So you're raising lots of, yeah. Yes, it's a absolutely basic premise, but yeah, so a lot of issues are being brought up. So one of them is So one of them is that we don't really talk about, something that was very implicit in what you said was, how do I know, part of that is role models. How many students, and I can share a little bit, I guess, of my background. So being an immigrant in a new country, so leaving Africa to go to Canada as an immigrant, blue-collar worker, right? My father worked at the airport, my mother had to work in a factory in Montreal so we can make ends meet, okay? My parents were not, NIH scientists, they were not doctors, okay? So no role models, right? So education is like, you go to school because that's what you're supposed to do. You're not 18, and then after you're 18, you join the workforce because that's a default, right? Compare that to a kid, so my daughter now, and the expectations are higher. The conversations at home are higher, right, in terms of role models. So I'm trying to do my best to affect the regulation because it's very personal, okay? So yeah, she comes to school with me. She hangs out in my lab. She goes to dinner with my colleagues who come to visit. We just had a colleague who's a postdoc who came, she was with us for 4 months, and typically we don't invite our spouses, our students or postdoc spouses. It's my kid, I want to come. It's like, all right. So all this exposure, the expectations, I want to go into law. It's like, you can go to McGill. Your father did your PhD. Expectations are different. If you already come from that kind of background, you already have a leg up compared to the average kid. Right? So role model is extremely important. So in game-based learning environments, one of the interesting things could be that they could include role models to show that. And I'll show a video clip of one of the environments that we're trying to develop, which is for women in STEM and represented minorities. Okay, so you could be an African-American girl in our central region of Florida or anywhere else, okay, and all of a sudden it's like, I get to go into a bioinformatics lab. It's a game where I can go into a bioinformatics lab. I can get to meet with other, scientists that are here. And they're not all white males, right? They're African-American, Asian females, okay? That kind of stuff. So I think part of what we can do with games in terms of societal challenges is also provide the role models, even though they're virtual agents, that most of our kids in society don't have. Right, I think that's extremely important. Sorry, I went off on a little bit on that.
I wanted to actually feed on that.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
other way of looking at it is
Yeah.
that the games provide them with a new way of seeing themselves. They get to adopt a role that they
Mhm.
didn't originally think that they had.
Yep.
I started doing martial arts after I started playing Dungeons and Dragons
Mhm.
because I wanted to see could I do
Yeah.
something that my character could do.
Sure. Yeah. Uh-huh.
You build up through first identifying yourself with the capability of doing the thing.
Sure.
And then that can help you to progress and move forward with the thing.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily, it's not just seeing representations of yourself.
No, that's
but
right.
Putting yourself in the environment
Yep.
and being respected in that environment.
Absolutely. And that's such a critical aspect because we typically do not see ourselves from, like right now, I can't see what I'm doing unless I go and watch that videotape, which would be really hard to do in real time. We'll try to do this. You always see yourself through somebody else's eyes, right? But yes, so what you just mentioned is something that we just got $10 million funding from the federal government and the military to do, is to create a human digital twin, right? So if the engineer, we're always envious, if the engineer can have their digital twin of an engine, of a car, of a tank, right, a turbine, why can't we, who study human learning, have a human digital twin, right? And what would that be? So imagine getting a kid, we just submitted a grant to NSF, where we're looking at underrepresented minorities, especially Hispanic students. Since 27% of our student population is Hispanic, but mostly Hispanic girls, is getting them to design their own human digital twin. And if you were to design your own digital twin, what would you embody in that twin of yours? And then can we take that twin and then bring the twin into a game or into a virtual environment? And then eventually, think about gerontology with the College of Medicine, is that then you would have your digital twin would actually, if this was your house and you had walls, so we were using nanomaterials so that the walls now hear, feel, and think, and your human digital twin would actually be embedded in the wall. So imagine, not too far future, you're 110 years old, you've lost your spouse, your kids may not be with you, right? But your human digital twin is always with you to remind you of everything. But what happens when your human digital twin then exceeds your knowledge and skills? Okay, so there could be some danger, but anyways, some ethical privacy issues, of course, related to that. But
the other one I wanted to bring up is that games provide a low cost of failure. We're allowed to make mistakes in them.
Yep.
In a lot of the educational contexts that we deal with, you're left with a situation where you're being told failure is not an option, or failure is bad, or everything like that. You put a person into a situation, you call it a game, and suddenly failure is acceptable. In fact, it's expected. In fact, you're expecting them to come up with weird solutions and weird options.
Absolutely. Yep. So for those of you probably familiar with Manu Kapoor's work, they're failure-driven. He's in Switzerland with the failure-driven approach to learning. Right, and like you said, that's something we don't emphasize. How come we don't emphasize that in school? It's okay to fail. In fact, probably the best learning lessons are when you fail, right? Not when you succeed. Okay, so absolutely. Okay, what else? What are some other reactions to what we're talking about here? One of the pragmatic issues that we deal with is, as a typical faculty member applying for funding, so our typical NSF grants are for 3 years. They're 1.5 million, which seems like a lot of money. But then, of course, our university comes in and takes 52% of that. So we're starting with 750,000 divided by 3 years. You at least have us as the learning scientists, and then it's either a computer science faculty who probably runs a game lab, right? We'll have to have a software developer. So it's not very much money, right? By the time you get the developer to develop the environment, it's going to take a while, at least a year, to get anything. Right, and you probably start testing it in years 2 and 3. The question then also, how can we compete when, for example, we have the game giants, Ubisoft? Okay, like when I was in Montreal, go approach Ubisoft when I was at McGill. It's like, hey, do you want to collaborate? They're like, well, this is, you know, we're a game developer. This is what drives what we do. We're like, we're not interested in money. We're interested in basically, are these games effective? How do we know that they're effective? Where's the data? You know, can we put them in front of humans, right, to test it? Same thing with living in Orlando. We have EA Sports, which dominates, you know, it's one of the competitive industries among many. How do we compete when we can't develop games that look as polished and refined like a game company? Right. So that's always one of our biggest challenges, right? So collaborating with them is always important, but then they also never want to really share what they do, right? Okay. All right. So let's start off with an easy one. Pedagogical challenges. There's a whole bunch of challenges, right, as we develop games and design. This is really interesting to have this in the room. Can I just I feel like it could have been distracted. Like I'm in the game, it's like, oh, there's this feature here. I want to know more about this. What is the, if I may ask, what? Just another type of seating arrangement? Is there a specific purpose for having this really exciting chair here? You're looking at me like, yeah, he definitely didn't get enough sleep last night. He's distracted. It's like the cat. Oh! Okay, all right, fine. So let's think about some of these issues, right? Starting with the third bullet. So if you're typical, you know, for a learner, what are the expectations that we have when a learner comes and sits in front of your game you're developing? What do they come in with that is important, that you think about when you are thinking about, like, there's a reason for me to put a game in front of this learner or these learners?
I'd say it depends on the specific game.
Mm-hmm.
Am I just trying to trigger some general situational interest toward a subject? Or am I trying to provide a simulation environment to fail repeatedly by trying out different scenarios and figure out how to approach a particular situation?
Okay, yep.
So like the nature, the scope of the project and all these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what else?
I always think about it in terms of transfer. So how is it just pushing a message, or is it attempting to get them to low road transfer or high road transfer?
Okay, yeah.
Because those will drastically change your design decisions on the build.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And transfer is one of the very few things that it's like the unicorn in the games research. Who measures transfer? Oh no, we just measure immediate, learning outcomes. Wow, that's great. Yeah. Not even like, did you measure again maybe a week later? No. Transfer? Nah, that's too hard to do. Right? And pragmatic, it is hard to do. Like, no matter how much money we throw out at participants, like, we need you to come back a month from now to do the, a delayed post-test. Can we give you more money? No. Right. So, yeah. So that's extremely important. Okay. What else?
I guess the target group, right? I mean, if I have like very young children.
Young children.
Adults, I
Yep.
think it makes a very much design and approach the game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. What else?
I think it's been said, I work for a serious games company in France. So what we do actually is create serious games.
Mm-hmm.
Some digital training using game-based learning. And one of the things, as you said, is transfer. Even now, employees should come right after the training, they don't do it, which is really hard to measure. That's my job, to measure every
Sure.
situation. But also, it's according to what they can perceive about the training. I think this is the most critical issue when we create those trainings.
Mm-hmm.
It's different. I mean, the topic is there.
Yep.
You need to be trained how to learn how to manipulate this laptop, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But even though we got the targets,
Yep.
even if we discuss with the manager, it's really, really complicated to translate this, of the target into a scenario.
A scenario.
Story.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most critical issue.
Absolutely.
How to translate the main target into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the learner's perception of the value that they give to the training.
They can understand what you put
Mm-hmm.
In any kind of words, they will appreciate it.
Sure.
They are not experts actually.
Mm-hmm.
They can perceive everything you gave them to.
Yep.
But at the end,
Mm-hmm.
you need to measure if the training was good or wasn't good enough. So that's
Absolutely. Okay.
But I wonder, I suppose that there is some sort of a disjunction between what they experience or what they perceive and in terms of what they do, isn't it? So
Mm-hmm.
we need to understand these kind of differences. What
Absolutely.
The qualitatively different ways of perceiving something and
Mm-hmm.
what the different ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
There also is a
Yep.
huge disconnect many times between the learning goal and the playing goal or the ludic goal.
Absolutely.
Why the person would actually play this game.
Yep.
And I see when students come to me with design pitches
Mm-hmm.
in courses, they haven't stopped and thought from the player's perspective. They haven't put
Mm-hmm.
themselves in the player's chair
Yep.
and gone, why would I engage with this at all?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Whereas the essence there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one way to do that is so we believe very much in the participatory design, right? It's not just about who we as academics, right, or even working with teachers or the industry partners or the business partners, right? With our perceptions of what you as the learner should be doing, right? We need to include you as the learner, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, yes, sir.
Yeah, I was thinking about the question that what is the goal of the learner? Is the
Mm-hmm.
goal like beating the game or like learning?
Yep.
And that is quite interesting distinction. And should we design the games for
Yep.
the learners that they know that their
Mm-hmm.
goal is to learn, or that their
Yep.
goal is to just beat the game and they learn when
Yep.
they are playing it?
Absolutely. Yep. And then let's say it's a game for changing attitudes, right? Then we need to assess whether that was effective, right? But it's a completely different aspect, right? In terms of the design of the game, right? If it's, let's say, aspects towards, let's say we focus a lot on attitudes in gender roles, right? So imagine teaching male, so engineering firms dominated by males, right? So basically educating male engineers what it's like to have a female engineer, right? If we want integration into the workforce. So if that's about attitude change, then what does the game look like? Because it's different. How are you going to measure whether male engineers' attitudes towards females in the workplace has changed, but also vice versa? What is the female engineer's perspective and understanding in a male-dominated workplace, if that makes sense, right? Or if you're teaching about empathy, right? Okay. All right. So some of the other ones, the traditional ones, are things like, of course, prior knowledge, like how much, now I'm going to learn about thermodynamics. It's like, you know, I'm majoring in psychology. That's why I majored in psychology, so I didn't have to do physics, right? So I have a really bad attitude towards, like, I don't want to, no task value, I don't want to learn about thermodynamics. I know it's going to be challenging. I'm going to get frustrated, right? Probably going to get confused. So imagine all the baggage that I'm already bringing that you may not even know, right? But that's going to impact how I'm going to approach this game, which you've designed with all the bells and whistles, right, and all the theoretically based approaches. It's going to be the best, but then it's not going to work for me because you're not really dealing with me versus, let's say, an engineering student who's actually embarked and knows why they need to learn about this material, right? So how do we treat those two different learners differently within even the same game environment, right? That's going to be a challenge. Because then what happens, right, with all these technologies? This is not only for games, right? We select a particular task, a particular domain, a particular set of learners, and then we develop a game, right? So we're developing little games, right? But how are we going to, go ahead.
Is it because you need to have free computational models out of it? Yeah? So
That's part of the answer. Yep.
You need to build a stack of different data,
Mm-hmm.
so you can build these different types of computational models, and then you
Yep.
can analyze what's going on.
Yeah, and that's a challenge because that's very computationally heavy, right? It takes a long time and also financially heavy to be able to do that accurately, right? So that's a huge problem.
Rose Macken from UCL
Mm-hmm.
has actually investigated this kind of topic, how we could perhaps gain some data out of constructing these 3D computational thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep, absolutely. All right.
You brought up
Oh, sorry.
point about it all being little games.
Mhm.
One of the things that has come up in my research on cybersecurity games
Mhm.
is that over 90% of them appear in the literature once and then disappear.
Yep.
They're just being created, they're being used in one test study, and then they're being
Mhm.
disappearing into the ether. Which
Yes.
means that we're never building on
Yep.
work that has gone before, we're constantly reinventing the wheel.
The wheel, yeah.
And this is a huge issue.
That's a huge problem, yes, absolutely. It's a huge problem when you're building, it's a huge problem when you're trying to synthesize the literature, and only very few of us have actually, so within the intelligent tutoring system, AINet community, have been able to do that. So like with MetaTutor, so we developed MetaTutor about 15 years ago, so we just, a couple of months ago, published in Frontiers in Psychology, where it's basically a synthesis of all the work that's been done with MetaTutor across cognition, affect, metacognition, motivation. Other people would be like AutoTutor, which was our Gracers, AutoTutor, Valerie Shute, at least in games, she's the one who's kind of kept this kind of systematic approach to using, but you're right, absolutely, we're a minority when it comes to that, right? And part of that also, so, but there's a good part and bad part about that, right? Because the reason we stopped working on MetaTutor for the last 5 years is because now when you submit MetaTutor, the reviewers, right, which also tend to be younger academics, they look at MetaTutor, it's like, oh, that's a traditional intelligent tutoring system. That's like old school, right? We need something different. It's like, yeah, but there's a wealth of information. So let's not bank on something that has been successful for like 15 years. Let's bank on, we'll give you a 3-year project for this little game, and then we're done, like you were saying,
Yeah.
right? So which model? What's the best model?
Which gets you money.
Yeah. Well, that's the other part, right? The dirty part about this is the chasing the money, at least 10 minutes. And the question is that long enough for whatever you're trying to teach or train students to do, right? Or is it going to be repeated exposure? right? Is it going to be for 5 hours? Where are you going to get money to build a game that could last up to 5 hours?
I think it's so specific. You need to always have like this very specific learning goal in mind and then design towards that exactly. I think we are like set a little bit in the way how we learn. Like we all had one book in front of us. And this is how it's going. Yeah. We know that you couldn't do so much better. Not only with games, but like generally like digital technologies in general. So we have a lot of opportunities to increase the learning outcome. It's very, very specific. Otherwise, we can just go big.
Yeah, and that's the traditional approach, is the default, like you were saying, right? So one of the thoughts for us is, all right, instead of just I'm going to build a game for physics, a game for thermodynamics, a game for math, how about we pull back and rethink about this is, if we know that self-regulation is critical to STEM learning, how about we build a game that teaches students about self-regulation across STEM? So how can we teach a student, for example, how to do experiments, right, and the scientific reasoning approach to doing experiments, and infuse that with metacognition? But it doesn't matter what the experiment, so I can draw from different disciplines because I can draw from STEM disciplines, right? So it's really about teaching how to learn across STEM, as opposed to learning in one STEM topic, in one STEM, which is the traditional way that we typically do that. And if that's one approach, then how does that change the conceptualization of how the game should be designed? Right? Because now there can be many activities, right? One's going to be in physics, one could be, in chemistry, biology, etc. Right? Does that make sense, folks? Right. Now, that has been really hard to sell to funding agencies and to gaming companies, because we're still in that mode of we just build one game for this thing and that's it. Right, and then we're done, and we go to the next one. Right, so what's the solution? Is there a solution? Not that you have to have the answer. I don't have the answer.
I mean, it's also about sustainability, right? Like if you're always creating like a very specific game. So, I mean, you mentioned the gaming industry, of course. There are like very popular game engines. We don't have like a dedicated game-based learning
engine? Yeah, absolutely. But that would be cool.
Yeah.
Right? Why can't we have one?
Yeah.
Right?
We have a few. They're just not very good. And
okay.
These like 2-3 year projects that have had no follow-ups. So there was this. I wonder if any of this crowd was involved in. There was an engine called E-Adventure, U-Adventure. I think it was a Spanish thing, and there was a consortium of universities. Ours was a part of that. Basically, there was a complementary approach where instead of creating games for students to learn through, it was more about involving students in the game creation process as a way of learning about self-regulated learning, because you have to figure out how you create the model for whatever it is that you're trying to represent, right? And it has to be subject-specific. And the tools were designed to be friendly enough to use for someone who had zero programming skills. But, again, we're not, we don't have the capacity with the funding and the time frames we're working on to be competing with Unity or Unreal or GameMaker for usability, for functionality, and also basically there's no, so the project lasts for 3 years. If you're lucky, in 2 years' time after the project is finished, maybe the domain name still works. It doesn't. So thanks to GitHub, I think we can still find some of these things, but basically that's been the problem. So there's like pockets of space where people are trying to do stuff, but they're not really good at disseminating that. And a lot of the stuff they're creating is not terribly usable. And a lot of that was also made with Flash, which...
Oh my gosh, Flash, wow.
I suppose you can have some sort of an SDK, isn't it? Like, having, using Xcode, for instance, different kind of libraries and so on. So you can have something like that. And then you can just pop in the content that you want, and then all of a sudden you have some sort of a cross-disciplinary API STEM kind of thing. So you don't have to put all this money for resources because the SDK is going to be ready.
Okay, interesting.
One of the projects we're hopefully working on starting in January. It's got funding, but they still have to sign the documents. So it's actually to create an environment and storage area for cybersecurity games specifically for kids. And the other aspect of it is to create the design recommendations and the how to create the database so that teachers can actually find them and use them. And that might be an area that we have to look for, is starting to digitally archive and preserve work and try to secure funding for those things. And look at how it can be monetized later through voluntary subscriptions and things like that to support it into the future.
I mean, I think it's also then about interdisciplinarity, right? I mean, if you, like you said, like you visit like the AI conference and you're visiting the learning conference, so sometimes at early, for instance. Some, let's say, nice games, but then you're going to a more like engineering heavy conference where you see like a super nice program game, but like the approaches are completely different. So if you just would join forces sometimes, like you would come up with a much more innovative solution. It's the same thing with you know, how to disseminate those this stuff. So it's a interdisciplinary effort that is necessary to really advance, I think, the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why most of us, I mean, our projects are interdisciplinary in nature. I mean, you know, I'm a psychologist. I know the limits of my knowledge, right? And I know that to be successful, you need to work across disciplines. So we always have either computer science or engineering, business school, biomedical folks, right? Teachers, K-12 students. I mean, so, but that also has to do with how people are trained, right? If you are trained that you are comfortable enough living in an interdisciplinary world, and a lot of universities pay lip service to that. So for those of you, this is my 5th university after close to 25 years, right, of being a faculty member. And that's part of the story of, you know, training at McGill, training at Carnegie Mellon, where you train as an interdisciplinary researcher. You don't do anything but that. And then going to places that are too traditional. And they don't know what to do with you because you're the chameleon. It's like, oh, this guy talks to everyone.
Yeah.
Right? So when you have the chair, for example, my former chair in psychology in North Carolina, say it's like, you work with people in College of Design and Engineering, Computer Science, and like what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm so wealthy because I can collaborate across disciplines. Why would I want to live in my silo? Right? So yeah. So, but learning how to do interdisciplinary research is also challenging, or dealing with businesses and industry. Right? So you need to learn how to do that, and you need to know that sometimes it ends up in failure, and that's okay, because failure is part of learning. Right?
It's often like a trade-off.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, in my experience, it's always a trade-off, but like you need to be very open.
Absolutely, yeah. But not everyone is open to do that. Yeah, absolutely.
There's one question I think might be useful to add after the what type of activities will learners be asked to engage in. What are we asking them to do after they're finished with the game? How are we encouraging debrief? Because I come also from the wargame tradition, and the thing in all of the literature there is that the debrief is the most essential part of the actual game.
Okay.
And it's also the part that is always neglected, either for time constraints or from whatever.
Sure.
And sometimes we seem to forget, we seem to go, hey, here's the intervention, and then we're going to test what the intervention did, and then we're done.
And we're done, But that's a typical approach, And then, I don't know about you that work, so we were also working with K-12. So we'll bring Crystal Island, which is also another game that we've been, co-developing with our colleagues at North Carolina State for over 10 years. And it's the same thing. So my job is to sell, right? So get on the phone with teachers, principals. Hey, we got this great game. You got high school students who are going to be in your health academy or doing microbiology. Game is free. Can we come in? Sure, no problem. But then it's like, well, we don't know when we're going to fit you into the curriculum. Because at least in the United States, I mean, the curriculum is, exactly. That's why we're doing so well in our international. The U.S. always does so well in international competitions of STEM. Add sarcasm. So we're trying to figure out where, it's like, yeah, but I can't give you 3 days, I can't give you a week, I give you 45 minutes. And then we're like, oh, 45 minutes, okay, we are going to go to the schools, 45 minutes, I gotta do a pre-test with self-report measure learning out pre-test, and then the kids are gonna play with the game, and then I still have to give you an immediate post-test equivalent and self-report measures, so they're gonna be spending maybe 20 minutes with the game. That's all you're giving us? Like, I see we've lost a couple of people. That's okay. Yeah, it's all good. So yeah, let's continue. So trying to be adaptive also. So, whenever preparing for workshops, my thing is always over-prepare with lots of slides, and then, because the richness comes from the interactions that we're having. That's as opposed to me standing up there, like when I make fun of, sorry, not make fun of my college students, my graduate students in the first teach, he goes, the last thing I want you to do is I don't want you standing there at the podium and then just, next slide. Next slide. It's like, I know you're frightened of the students out there, but deal with the fear. It's okay. You're going to learn to embrace it. It's no longer fear, right? So part of this is that richness in the interaction. So I'm going to skip a couple of things here because I also want to give you overview of one of the works that we're doing. So kind of moving along here. So if we think about SRL training with serious games, which I think is an area that we need to start exploring, right? It's that idea that we're not just teaching or using a serious game like our traditional way, right? For a particular type of learner, topic, task, etc., learning outcome. But if we're thinking about self-regulated SRL training, right, which also some people really hate the word training. Like, how is that different than education? It's like, I don't care what you call it as long as you give us the funding. I mean, oh, sorry. Did I say that? Oh, sorry, I'm being recorded. Oops. Right. So here's a typical student. So we got Crystal Island, and I'll present some of the work during my keynote on Thursday. So we've done a lot of work with Crystal Island over 10 years with our collaborators, James Lester in computer science at North Carolina State University. And we can continue to do that, and we have the various versions of the system. But typically this is what a student looks like, a college student at least in our laboratory, right? So in some cases we'll collect concurrent think aloud protocol so we can tell whether the student, they're learning about microbiology, right? Whether they're learning about biology. So they can say, viruses, and then all of a sudden they say something like, oh, wait, I don't understand that. As a psychologist, that's beautiful. I can differentiate between what's included in the game that you're reading. And then the fact that you said, oh, I don't understand this, that's beautiful. You have just uttered the fact that you're monitoring your reading. I don't understand that could be segmented. Of course, it's all done post hoc. We would love to do it as in real time. I don't understand this is a metacognitive process. It's a specific type of metacognitive process called a JOL, or judgment of learning. And guess what? It's also got valence. I don't understand this is different than I understand this. So it's also negative. So from a self-regulatory perspective, if you just utter that, then I'm going to be very curious to what are you going to do right after you've uttered that statement. Oops, sorry. Excuse me, Char. Okay. So a typical good self-regulated learner would do what? If I'm reading, I'm trying to understand the difference between bacteria and viruses, and I just said, I don't understand this. What should I be doing if I'm being adaptive? Probably go back and reread, because we know from reading comprehension, the psychology of reading, that rereading is a good thing, right? If they do that, the non-player character should not intervene. You're doing exactly what you should be doing. How about if I say, I don't understand this, and now because we got the eye tracker, we can detect that you're still reading at 500 miles an hour, right? Now we got a problem, right? Because now the system should be intelligent enough to intervene, and we're back to that problem. Right? How much sampling? How much time do I give you? Knowing full well that now you're engaging in a maladaptive strategy, right? And if I'm going to stop you from doing that, when do I do that? And then what do I say to you? Do I just say, stop, this is not, the right strategy? Like, we don't even have the interventions. What would be some of the interventions that you would engage in if we know the student is engaging in a maladaptive strategy in a game environment? Stopping is easy, well, kind of, because we don't know the timing, right? Because it could be that they're interested. Like, I know I don't understand this, but I really want to continue reading. It's like, does that make any sense from a learning perspective, right? Because now if I stop you, am I going to kill your, kill is a bad word, educationally kill your interest in reading more about this topic, even though you don't understand it? right? Because now we got a problem, right? Is it about learning outcomes? Like you shouldn't be reading more because you got to change strategy, but I'm really motivated. I'm going to continue reading, right?
Or is it the reason that the person doesn't understand it, that they haven't got enough data yet? And
Can
they're
be.
trying to keep on with the reading process to see if they can pick up more clues.
Absolutely. Yep.
So they've cognitively understood everything that's been before, but need more data to be able to make a connection.
Absolutely. So we need more data moving forward to sample more forward, but in order to make that inference, we also need more data moving backwards, right? We need to have a kind of a moving window. And so now the moving window is it, different diameter, right? How much more do I need to go back before you said that, right? To understand really how much more forward I can let you go before I intervene. And we have no idea we can talk about it, we're talking about it now, but how do we actually implement this in an environment without interfering with learning, right? You're gonna...
Sorry.
No, you had your hand up. No? Okay. Okay, sorry, I thought you did. All right. Sorry?
I'm processing now.
Okay. He's monitoring. Here's your $5. Extrinsic reward. Just kidding. $5, that's not even enough euros.
Not bad. I don't mind.
I don't mind, yeah. Okay. Right, so these moving windows, right? But the question is, none of our games, at least the ones I've seen, how about we, a community, this is what we want to do, but how about we start why can't we help ourselves by taking the next step is, why can we use, for example, a very benign non-player character in this environment? It could be that one or someone else. That's Kim, she's the nurse, the camp nurse that tells the students. So basically you land on an island. This is pre-COVID, so like over 10 years ago. You land on an island and there's a biological outbreak. And so you read, you can test items, you can engage in scientific reasoning, you can talk to the scientists, you can talk to the nurse, you can talk to the patients. And you cannot leave the game until you solve the problem. And the problem keeps changing. So it's not like one kid tells the other kid, oh, it's salmonella. So the other kid goes in and tries salmonella. It's like, no. Okay. Why can't we use another strategy, which is you use an existing NPC, or it can be some other character. Why doesn't the character ask, well, can you tell me more about what you're confused? Why can't we use the non-player characters as research method tools, right, that are embedded in an environment, right, that can start helping us understanding why the student doesn't understand as part of the dialogue and the narrative in the design, right? Just throwing it out there.
I mean, you design like an obstacle, a pace, like that keeps the pacing a little bit maybe like an artificial obstacle.
Right, okay. Yep.
Apart from obstacle, also one thing is that we want them to be metacognitively active. Apart from providing adaptive support, we just want them to reflect on what they are doing. Even this agent just comes and asks the question, like, why are you confused now? Maybe it's not even, the agent itself is not processing any data from you, but
it's the trigger.
Just lets you to stop for a second and reflect on what you are doing.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
There is an inherent danger with it, however, of it becoming just a tell then test, where the agent is just, or the student feels that they're just constantly being asked, that it becomes a quiz in some regards.
Interesting. So
overusage.
Overusage, yeah. Okay, I can see that being a danger. Absolutely, yeah. But it gives, I can see the danger, but it gives the student, I like that. It's like we also make a really wrong assumption that, to be the best learner, we always have to be engaged. It would be so cognitively taxing and demanding if I have to be cognitively engaged for 2, 3, 4 hours. I mean, no human can do that, even us as trained, scientists. That's impossible to do. So this could give a break for them to reflect. But then the question becomes, the reflection is the other naughty word, right, in the literature, because what's reflection, right? You ask a teacher, it's like, they can't even sometimes explain what they're supposed to engage in reflection, right? But what is reflection? How do we know people are reflecting?
Impulsive reflection is also reflection, isn't it? I mean,
Could be, yeah.
impulsiveness.
Yeah,
It
okay.
is something that you do quick enough, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it is sort of, you know, some aspect of reflection.
Sure. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I mean, together with Christian at some point, we had this game-based math task on fraction comparisons, and after the children like compared the size of the magnitude of the fractions, we asked them to explain how they came to this conclusion. That oftentimes like, yeah, I made an error. It's actually like this. So they, by reflecting upon their answer, they realized they were wrong, and like correctly like explained then, okay, yeah, like I judged maybe too quickly.
Yeah.
So this helped also a lot. It's quite interesting.
That's interesting.
Sorry?
Were you also involved in this paper?
Yeah, at least we tried to record and use some speech synthesizer to get the text, but there was some problems of recording the sound.
The sound,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, because like we after them we recorded their verbal descriptions and then like, automatically tried to translate it into written text. So.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, also in terms of reflection, maybe, as you said, we should differentiate the timing of the reflection. If it's after the task, like you cannot go back to task anyway. So it's like, what's your takeaway from this? But if we do this reflection during gameplay and it, like thinking it as a more metacognitive activity, it's then monitoring, let's say. You're just trying to understand how you are doing. And apart from that, that thinking of how you are doing helps you to develop a strategy to keep continuing in the game. So it can be either in a retrospective way, reflection, or on-task reflection, which we call, let's say, metacognitive monitoring maybe.
Yeah, okay.
It does, however, have to match with the task that the person is currently doing.
Absolutely.
So if I'm in the middle of playing, let's go StarCraft, and it pops up with a window to say, why did you decide to rebuild 5 Marines now? I'm going to get pissed off at it more than I'm going to reflect on why I'm making that decision at that point.
Okay.
So in this game, it would work wonderfully because the primary task is to read and reply and respond. So it is being integrated into the task. I just get worried about the example I gave of completely derailing the movement through the
game
system and the game.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I was also going to comment that if we provide additional instructive support and ask how are you feeling, what kind of support you need, the game flow, it disrupts the game flow really drastically, and then it can be really overwhelming process that you constantly need to think about your metacognitive process and ask questions, and where is the like essence of gaming in there if this process is done too often.
Sure. But that's also, I think, one of the tensions in the literature, right? Because one of the assumptions is, there should be no scaffolding, no gaming, no AI, just, we assume the learner can make the best instructional decisions, they're just going to experience this, and then we look at pre and post or learning, and we haven't shown anything because they've been lost, basically, or they're not making good decisions, right? Versus too much intervening, too much interaction, right? Too many opportunities for reflection, etc. Absolutely. So I think what happens is, where's that balance, right, between game flow, as you were mentioning, right, basically going through the system, etc., and intervening, because we really, if we're going to intervene pedagogically, then we really need to understand, we need to have ground truth, right? And how are you going to get ground truth if you are just letting the player go through, right? And so a lot of this is going back to the literature, like Paul Kirshner, right, who's done a lot in terms of Cindy Mello Silver, talked about the whole dynamics in terms of scaffolding, right? Should we be scaffolding even with game-based learning environments, right? Because the assumption is, it's a very hard cognitive psychology perspective that, if we want them to learn, then we need to intervene and scaffold learners, just making the assumption, right? Which is different than radical constructivists, right? Absolutely.
Of course, in terms of game design, one approach to trigger this reflection or monitoring would be that instead of intervening, we analyzing the learner and intervening, it might be that can be the what the hell button, like when you get lost or confused, press the button.
Absolutely.
So then it's more like individual is agentic on asking the support, let's say. That
Yep.
would be one approach, for example.
Absolutely, yeah, the help-seeking behavior. So we can borrow a lot from what's been done at Carnegie Mellon in terms of the ACT-R tutors, right, in terms of Vincent Eleven mostly, with the help-seeking, the HSB, help-seeking behavior tutor, right? So the student, but guess what, with their ITSs, the students found out that if they keep pressing the help-seeking button, right, at the end, you don't even have to learn, you just literally sit there. The last hint is the answer to the math problem. Right, so now they put in detectors to avoid the abuse, the help-seeking abuse. But absolutely, yeah. But then it raises an issue with younger students, especially if we're looking at K-12. Younger students don't always know when they need help. Right. So if I don't know when I need help, you can have that help system, right? But I'm not even going to click on it because I don't even know right now that I have a problem. Okay. So another approach to this, let me show you another, where is the, just give me 1 second. It's right. Nope. Sorry, getting you confused here. So, this one. So one approach with another game that's also being developed by our colleagues, James Lester, and that we have a 3-year grant from NSF, is about environmental sustainability. Right, so a completely different approach. Collaborative problem solving, each kid is given a tile, so you can have the farming, pig farms, that's very contextual. So in North Carolina, there's a lot of pigs. Right, so the waste goes into the water, right? But you can have industrial, you can have forestry, etc. The kids are supposed to learn how the different variables, so nitrates, phosphates, etc. So very biology, chemistry related. Right, they have different assets, etc. So one of the approaches that we talked about using, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Judy Kay, who's at the University of Sydney, with her aspects of open learner model. Right, are you familiar with the open learner model approach? So an open learner model, so everything we've been talking about right now is the system under the hood. We're collecting all this data, we're making inferences to make it more intelligent. But we never reveal how the system is making those to the student. This approach it's a whole thing about agency and empowering the students. An open learner model is basically a data visualization that the system is using to make assumptions about the learner. Right? So if you are now intervening and giving me specific scaffolding, I want the system to show me why you are doing that for me. That makes sense. So instead of verbally describing, just like I did now, can we come up with data visualizations? Right? So Judy Kay and Susan Bull, okay, who used to be at Birmingham, have a whole classification of different types of open learner models. Right? Because otherwise, the student is flying blind. Right? All I know is that the system is intervening and giving me feedback and all that, but it's not telling me why it's doing that for me. So the lowest level is inspectable. So show me, right, the beliefs. It's basically the system showing its beliefs to the learner. I'm giving you this type of agency right now in this game-based learning environment because I believe that you still don't have foundational problem-solving skills to solve these problems. So that's inspectable. So they can be anywhere in the interface. You can pop that up. Right? The assumption is that once you show that to the learner looks at it, the learner can analyze the open learner model, make inferences and interpret, and then hopefully change their behavior, their learning behavior. Right? That's the lowest level. One of the highest levels is negotiable. So imagine from a self-regulatory perspective, you've been playing the game for about, let's say, an hour, right? And you really suck at metacognition as a learner. Sorry. Oops. Forget I'm being recorded on multiple devices. I'm a sucky learner in terms of metacognition. All right? You've been compiling all this data. It can be from eye tracking data, from decisions you're making, choices you're making during the game, etc. Now the system is going to provide you also with some data visualization about your metacognition. But guess what? you don't agree with the system's belief about who you are as a metacognitive agent. So now I can not only edit, right? So let's say, oh, you're really bad. Let's say it's a slider. You're really bad at making judgments of learning. And you can say, you know what? I'm actually really good. So I can override the system's belief about what it thinks I am in terms of metacognition. So imagine having that for metacognition, for emotions, for problem-solving strategies, depending on the context, right? And then once you negotiate, in the negotiated open learner models, the human always overrides the system beliefs, right? So then the game will change its behavior in terms of what it's going to do for you, given the amount of time, etc., right? So this is another approach to making, empowering the students and hopefully fostering some kind of agency, which has yet to be explored really in games. This has been done with intelligent tutoring systems. Many of these tutoring systems make these kinds of decisions. What do you think about this approach?
It just seems like an adaptive difficulty system in normal games, the AAA title. I used to work on the Finland franchise as a designer, and we did pretty much exactly the same to gauge the player's difficulty. So we'd have a test at the start of the game.
It's time to go? Sorry.
How bad they were at the game.
Okay.
But then they could go in later and use what you termed as negotiable to change the difficulty to suit how they felt they wanted the game to treat them.
Okay.
So yeah, it's something that I've seen in the industry quite a lot.
Okay. So yes, for different features, but here we're thinking about it from a learning. These are about learning processes, not about like, hey, I want a bigger challenge, so give me more challenges, or which could be a byproduct.
It's similar.
It's similar, absolutely.
It's giving you an adaptive experience, and I think the experience in games is one of the most important things that you can give a player. If they're too frustrated, then this would get turned off, as with any game that I've ever worked on.
Sure.
So yeah, you've got to give them that level of adaptability to allow them to actually enjoy and continue playing the game. There's no point creating a game if nobody ever plays it.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, it also a little bit counteracts the problem in terms of accuracy, how accurate the system is. So you could understand better why the system is making these decisions, and then could explain to the system, well, no, you're not right, but so this is a big part.
Absolutely.
In this very critical topic, in my opinion.
Okay. It could also, so we had one grant where it was a little dubious in terms of, imagine the open learner model shows you the wrong information about you. Right, so it says that you're really poor, let's say, at regulating your emotions, because we know that you keep getting frustrated and confused as you're playing the game. So if you see that data about you, and you know that the system's beliefs is wrong about your emotional regulation strategy, are you astute enough as a learner to say, no, you're completely wrong. This is, I can regulate my frustration. I might not be so good about regulating, let's say, my confusion, right, etc. Right. So one panel in particular thought that was being very deceptive and could potentially backfire educationally on students. I'm like, well, okay. I mean, are we going to damage people? Come on.
Technically, you could.
Well, yeah, especially if they're younger kids. Yeah.
Does the system account at all for neurodivergent learners?
Not so for this.
When I'm prone to repetitive behaviors, and the system detects that as a fault in how I'm learning, even though it's not a cognitive thing.
Yeah.
It's a neurodevelopmental thing.
Yeah, not this system in particular. Yeah, but that's another area that we need a lot more work in. Absolutely. Yeah, because then emotional regulation, for example, if you're on the spectrum, of course, it would be completely different. Right, and even the student model should be completely different in terms of its a priori belief system. Absolutely.
Yeah, or how they use the end. Maybe I'm just messing with the system to see what happens, and I'm not even focusing on the content anymore. I'm just curious about all the shiny buttons and the things that I can manipulate.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. All right. Wanted to show you as we're kind of, where are you? So this is one of the ones that I was telling you about before our break, about the getting African American girls in STEM, right? So here's, the idea was that, you know, here you have a young high school student, African-American student in a bioinformatics lab. This is actually a lab on our campus, right? And the fact that they don't have that many opportunities, right? Now imagine an immersive environment, virtual environment, where you now create your own avatar, right? So you talk about issues of identity, are extremely important, right? And as you peruse the environment, not only do you get to learn about, you know, biological data, but then you can also practice your clinical skills, right? And because you're practicing your clinical skills, you're also instrumented, right? So as you're practicing your clinical skills, you are also leaving a residue of your multimodal data. So in this case, we can overlay a heat map as you're trying to resuscitate this patient. So then we can go back in, right, obviously with the help of the clinicians to understand, right, based on one data channel alone and the heat map alone, right, whether you did the job correctly. And that's just a very static approach to assessing potentially clinical skills, right, that are very psychomotor in nature, right. But the one I wanted to show you is the biology outbreak, which is back here somewhere. Yep, nope, there we passed it. So hopefully we can play this video. Let's see if we can play the video and then we can have a discussion. Oops. That's weird. Not sure why it's not playing.
Is it embedded or trying to download it from YouTube or somewhere?
It's embedded. Let me see here. Do have a link. How many of you have PCs? So one of the things that we were going to do, I wanted to show you that as a video, but if you do have a PC, if you want to download, you can download the game. If you want to give it a shot, okay? And
any place we could find the link so we don't have to type it?
sorry, you're going to have to type it. I can read it out to you whenever everybody's ready. I can just yeah. I'm just demanding a little cognitive load. That's it. Let me know when you're ready, and then I'll read out the link. You guys ready? So HTTPS. So it's www.dropbox.com/P657367N7/SRLV7 ZOM capital SIM 2022-1150.
Roger, do you have internet in your laptop? We can just copy this link, the URL.
Oh, that's true.
So, like, if you just Google URL, button,
yeah, because I think you missed a Z.
I'm not sure if I'm linked to the internet. It doesn't exist?
I think the
Okay. I just checked this morning and I asked my colleague if it's still up and running. Okay. It's working?
Probably gonna use an error.
Yeah. Do you have everybody's email or?
Well, I can send it to Marcus. This thing, in theory, should be
Sorry?
compatible.
No, it only works on the PC. You got it up? Is anybody really able to download it?
I am downloading something.
Something? From a North Korean website? Oh, even better. Oh, oops, sorry. Wow, gotta be careful what I say.
Am I allowed to reference the Pentagon's preparation plan for
Sure.
zombie apocalypse?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Because in that case, if you get early enough military mobilization, it wipes it out.
There you go. Did you get it?
Nope. I'm gonna see if I can find. So,
657367 N7.
Oh, okay. I think the picture may have been a bit blurry, so it detected the 6 is a 5, so 6, 7,
N7 SR Z.
SR.
Yeah, SR.
Wow. Okay.
Z LV7.
SR.
Yeah, SRZ LV7
okay.
/ zom. Oops. Great.
I can just, yeah. So capital Z, OM, SIM, 2022, 11/15. Right, let's see how it works. Yep. So I can send it to Marcus, because he has
Okay.
his emails. Maybe.
Oh, okay, yeah, if you don't mind. You got it? You can send it? Just love technology. You got it? Yep. All right, so the link works. Step 1, yay.
But I can just pass it on and it doesn't work. So.
Oh, really? Oh, it's spreading the virus.
Yeah.
You can get it, but you can't pass it. That's good.
I haven't received your email.
Yeah, it's sent out. It should arrive.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you. Your virus would be in your mailbox in about 1 minute. Please make sure to click on it.
Simulator, how many gets the virus?
The plan is working. Just kidding. Dr. Evil. I keep forgetting we're being recorded.
I mean, my PC warned me of like
Did it?
executing the file. You know?
Oh, okay. All right. So that's good. So your antivirus is up to date. That's good.
So that link, so which is the file you should upload?
It's this one here.
So upload it?
Wait for further instruction.
I think the instructions are on there.
That's okay.
Yeah, the instructions.
The thing is,
And then it's the executable file.
this one?
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah, should be that one. Yeah, and you can extract all the files. Yep.
Just watch out this thing.
So your university blocks you can't download on university computers?
It says it's not installed, so it's...
Oh.
Could you share the email?
I just like extracted the files.
Yeah, when I start I send one thing, it says don't run.
Ah, okay. I guess you need admin rights for that.
I send you the thing.
Can you send to me too?
Okay, I send it. Hopefully yours works.
Sorry, Roger, just for context, what is the age group? What is the target demographic for this one?
Yeah, so, now that and you'll have time, sorry, just trying to butt up against time here, so you can play on it with your own, I know we can talk about it. So the age group here would be college students, right? So it's basically teaching them scientific reasoning. So you'll notice that you'll go through a whole bunch of steps in terms of setting up your simulation, how many people are going to get infected, what's your population, what's your infection rate, etc. The idea is that the differential equations underlying viral transmission are actually accurate because my collaborator, Barry Robinson, is an evolutionary psychologist. So the idea is instead of teaching students explicitly about what these differential equations are and how the variables are related to set up the equation, the idea is you set up the simulation, right? And we can give you scenarios. Let's say you have 3 attempts at the simulation, but you can only infect people with a certain range, etc. Right? So looking at scientific reasoning, can you induce the mathematical formulations underlying viral transmission, right? And then the question is to look at game behavior. Right now, the game still needs a lot of work in terms. So computationally, it is extremely accurate. From a game-based learning environment, it still needs a lot of work, including things like it doesn't even have sound. And if it has, it should include sound, and not the sound of people dying. One kid last week said that we had 30 high school kids. That's the first thing that they said. Oh, we should hear sounds of people dying. Not appropriate. Of course, they thought it was a big laugh. So what are game design elements that should be included? What kind of scaffolding should be included, right? What kinds of scenarios can it provide? So the idea also is to teach it, to use it not only for college students, but can we bring this kind of high-level simulation to K-12? But also, the question is, how would you change it so that it could also be used in expertise studies? So you can have an epidemiologist versus, let's say, a first-year undergrad college student in biology. But the other more important thing about societal challenges, right, is can we use this with the regular, as we call in psychology, lay people, the average day person, to teach them about the biology underlying viral spread so that maybe we'll see more vaccine adoption, can we change our attitudes towards the scientific basis of vaccination, et cetera, right? Or making good public health decisions. So that's something we haven't explored, but that's definitely an interest, especially with funding agencies such as NIH are very interested in how do we change population's approach to understanding science, right? Scientific literacy. So that's a little bit of the background, if that makes sense. And then what Barry, our colleague, did is, so in this handout, which I'll give you the PDF of this, the Word version of this that you can then distribute, this is basically one way of scaffolding students of any kind in terms of doing 2 different scenarios. One is comparing the Spanish flu to the current COVID situation. Yeah. Right now it focuses on the US, so the map is very US-centric, of course. They have mapped the airport systems, the highway systems, a whole bunch of infrastructure. And the question is, so as a kid, you can compare what happens if I start with 50,000 infected people and I unleash them on the highways in the US versus what happens if I take the same amount of people and I put them on all the major airports in the US. What would happen? How long does it take to, let's say, infect 50% of the population? So they can do that kind of compare and contrast. They're now linking it also to Google Earth. So now we can start comparing, let's say, to European countries, African countries. Yeah. So that's the plan. Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Roger, we scaffolding on how to play. We drop the infections.
Yeah, you can drop as many infections. Yeah.
How do we fasten the process?
Yeah. So top right, you can fast forward. That's the timeline. You can accelerate. So that's the other thing is we want to be able to accelerate time, right? Because it is a simulation faster. So let's say, can we do it, a year from now or?
lovely blue area.
And then if you notice on the bottom right is the data vision, it is the dynamic. So they're supposed to be looking to see what they're doing as you are dropping people, infected people, how it's changing, right, the population, infected, not infected, etc. Is it working for you guys? Are you going through the process setting up the simulation? Okay.
It's Unity, right?
Sorry?
The software is Unity.
Unity, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
We can.
Oh, it's three-dimensional. Well, the interface, getting it to slide to the right.
Oh, to the right?
Is actually incredibly difficult.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I can zoom in, but if I zoom in to be able to select the city,
yeah,
I lose both the left and the right.
Oh, the left or right.
Then I can't move with the mouse.
Okay.
I can't actually move to select New York City
I
or
see.
Buffalo.
Okay.
Because I've zoomed in enough to be able to go into, but
Can you like right click and drag or something like that?
nope.
No? No? No sense. It's okay.
The other thing is that it's more intuitive to be able to figure out how to.
Yeah.
If I want to go down into New York.
Stop in about 10 minutes. About 10 minutes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm interested in educational equity and gamification, and you have mentioned several pedagogical issues like the gender and the minority.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have any research or practice or game that can be used to address the educational equity problem.
I can remember. Yeah. Not directly per se, but there's no reason we can compare, let's say, women and men and all that, as the participants, and also the participatory design. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's something we're very interested in. Yeah. So send me an email. Are you a student here?
I'm a researcher.
Oh, you're a researcher, sorry.
Research director at Tübingen University.
Oh, Tübingen.
Yeah, I will be leading a Delphi study about our topic.
Oh, okay. Are you presenting at the conference also?
No, but I'm responsible for this networking, especially for Delphi study. I wonder if you will join our lunch or
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I will. Yeah, I want to know more because with Tübingen, I've been in there several times. Especially, I don't know if you know Katharina Scheider, Peter Gergitz, who did a lot of like multimedia and cognitive load and eye tracking. Yeah.
I'm currently working with Ko Murayama and something also about motivation.
Oh, so we need to talk. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We'll finish. Yeah, we'll talk. Sorry? Yeah, so one of the things we need to do is not slow. We don't need it slower, is to accelerate the time, right?
Oh, no, we are. We're already 1 week in.
1 week in, okay.
With infection in Texas, California, Washington, Florida, and Ohio.
Okay. And so what are the data visualization showing? Any changes?
No, nothing.
No? Okay. So maybe you want to drop some more infections? Wow, is that a new, we can add that as a feature. I'm just kidding. You want to see people die?
No.
I see where this is going.
Games bring out the evil inside.
The evil. Wow. Might have to double lock.
This is November. This is how our mood is.
Literally, I'm dropping an infection
all
over the place.
Right. All right.
maybe the presets are.
So yeah, so as we're getting closer to the to noon, so I'm glad you're able to download it. If you have time and you want to share your thoughts, do send me an email. We're always obviously in the plan of changing. You also have, and I'll share this with you. I'll send it by email, and then you can share with everyone else. So this is basically a lesson plan that can be changed, right? Which is one way to compare scientific reasoning. In this one, it basically forces students, of course, this can also be embedded in the system. Like Crystal Island, there's actually a worksheet. This worksheet can be included in the system. And then ideally, so as we're about to start a new study with this, with our colleagues who developed this outlet. So this is ideally what an instrumented
delivered for this simulation.
So this is one of the planned experiments in the lab. The student is fully instrumented, is doing a concurrent think-aloud protocol. So basically actualizing this.
Visualization of the state diagram rules. Another nearly random guess, but some of them should be vaccinated. If elected, somebody who was vaccinated will get sick anyway.
So there's a lot of hypotheses being developed. And we're also interested is also, of course, once he sets up the simulation, he runs the simulation, is what inferences is he making from the data, right? While not only watching the rates of infection, but also looking at these two data visualizations in particular to make inferences about people who are dying, those who are infected, and those are incubating. Okay. Yep. All right.
The infection does not seem to be spreading very much.
All right, we have about 5 minutes, so.
Yeah, early, it wasn't as lethal as we hoped on the reset.
So, you guys are bad.
Literally, Austin just is fully recovered.
Fully recovered, wow. Oh, that's, oh darn, oops, sorry, that's Texas.
It's Austin.
It's Austin, yeah.
Don't let the Texans hear you say Austin is Texas.
I know, it's okay, I live in Florida, I'm far enough away. No, I'm just kidding. There you go.
That's okay, I also hit in Miami and they're all recovering too.
Oh. So.
Roger, I have one question.
Yeah, questions?
I assume there is effect detection, like emotions
Mhm.
of the learner when
Yep.
processing this game.
Yep.
So when we look at this facial cognition, we mostly see that the emotions are classified like positive, negative, neutral, let's say sad, angry.
Mm-hmm.
And in most cases, actually, like majority of the emotions are either neutral or sad, let's say. Happiness and other kinds of emotions occur rarely.
Absolutely.
Of course, to me, this also becomes a challenge in terms of providing a support to the learner, like because the variety of emotions provided to us by these affective detection systems, they don't provide much cues about metacognition or like the deep processes we are really interested to understand.
Absolutely.
Just knowing the face is positive or a bit neutral this time, it doesn't help me to provide support. So, for example, in terms of epistemic emotions, more like frustration, curiosity, emotions more loaded with the cognition, let's say, or metacognitive processes. How we can make this happen, like processing of affective emotions that refer to cognitive processes, let's say.
Yeah, so that's going to be one of the challenges, and that continues to be a challenge, right? Because we're also on the impression, if we think about emotions, and yes, there's the Logitech Cam, right? In real time, we're running the iMotions software, right? So we know the intensity, the action units, all that good stuff. So one of the ideas is, in terms of this particular, going back to the, we talked about context, this particular game, learning about, scientific reasoning, making inferences about viruses. The question is, I think there's always the assumption in affective computing that once we know people's affective states, that we need to intervene, right? And I think that's a faulty assumption, right? So, but if we need to intervene, right, is it for specific emotions, right? That, you know, should we be only looking at boredom, confusion, frustration, right? Would we see any basic human emotions in this environment, especially dealing with the fact that, you know, people are simulating, you know, they're dying, right? So that's one question. Maybe with some noise. The biggest issue is going to be the detection of strategies, right? In this case, for, at least for strategies, as you're mentioning, Mudrun, right? We can obviously have the log file data. It would be ideal if we can collect, or if we're collecting the concurrent thing log protocol, should we focus specifically on language? And can we do that NLP in real time to intervene, right? So is it log file, screen recording, verbalization, right? The metacognitive is what's going to be really interesting, and I think with this environment, because potentially there's a lot going on, is that cognitive, we actually haven't talked about cognitive load either, right? Is there a constant extraneous cognitive load, especially for a learner who doesn't know this, and is that basically overriding any aspect of metacognition, where now you're just reacting to the system, right? You're reacting to the system, and you're trying to interpret what the system is doing, right? So very little time for, or space for metacognition, if you will, right? Yeah, these are all questions that, you know, we're grappling with, that we are very interested in, you know, embarking on.
In terms of, again, scaffolding to the learner, like when I look at the SRL literature or like studies that study regulation in collaborative settings, findings say that the groups, they develop their plan in the beginning and they rarely change afterwards. So the beginning is the most crucial part, basically. They decide on a strategy and they just stick to it. Then they just don't monitor and say like, oh, maybe we are doing something wrong, and start from the beginning. So in that case, like, I am more in support of, let's say, providing scaffolding interventions, because if in the beginning the strategy is not correct, and unless we intervene, the findings say that they never change their strategy until the end. So.
Yeah, so with this particular game, if you notice at the beginning when you're setting up basically the simulation, if we consider that whole episode as the planning, if you go back to social cognitive model, Zimmerman's model and Chunk, right, you can consider that whole episode, if you will, while you're setting up the experiment as the planning phase, right? And then when you're running the experiment is actually the enactment phase, right? Now this is where obviously the Chunk and Zimmerman model would be very applicable, so would be the Winnie model, right? Because now you're supposed to be engaging metacognition monitoring. We have to add in the emotions, right? The other big thing is, what about the motivation that we talked about, but how do we measure motivation? And then is the reflection period, after I run one full simulation, is that when the reflection period comes in, right? And then it allows me to go back and reset the simulation again, go back to planning, enactment, reflection, right? So it's really up to us as researchers, when are we going to impose those three macro processes based on theory, right? That would be very applicable here, right? And then would the scaffolds be different? So do I provide a scaffold, different types of scaffolds for the planning when I'm setting up the simulation? Are those going to be different than the scaffolds I provide while I'm enacting and I'm watching as I'm basically, killing people or not? Right?
I have one question also about the motivation.
Yeah.
So when we look at the metacognition or the emotions literature, so the conceptual understanding or theoretical foundations allow us to do this process-oriented look. Like they change fast, emotions, like judgments, let's say. But when we look at the motivation literature, most of the theories are like view motivation as a trait, like values, importance. So it's not like they change immediately. The value of learning math, it doesn't change for you in a second. So what are the theoretical guidelines for us, like, or the basics for us to study motivation in a more process-oriented manner? And the only thing I see mostly in the literature is this situational interest. And I don't see...
and that's what we use, like with Crystal Island, which... So I think you bring up an excellent point, and this is a point where we can actually collaborate, for example, also in terms of where do we fit, if we're going to use self-report measures of motivation because they are very well established and are relevant still, where would we, if we think about the timeline of a research experiment, right, or a student running through an entire simulation, where along from the beginning to end, right, if the beginning is when you set up the simulation, then the enactment and the reflection, where along that timeline would you insert or administer the self-report measures that exist right now? Right? At the beginning, would you do one at the beginning? Because how interested are you in learning about viruses in general? That's probably very beneficial here, probably beneficial at the end of one run, right? But where would you put situational interest, task value? Does that go at the beginning and end also, right? Which motivation process should you be measuring when I am running the simulation and I'm looking at the different dynamic visualizations, right? Is there a particular motivational process or processes that are more relevant to that phase or aspect of learning with the game? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it might make, I mean, like...
Yeah. Well, compared to other people, right? I mean, other people then just do it, you know, it's a pre-test because you got a battery of self-report measures of motivation, and a post-test. And then it's like, thank you. Right? And the question is, what do you do in between? Which is really when you start treating motivation as a dynamic process also. But the problem is that it's a critical question, because when we look at cognition, metacognition, and affect, right, the temporal scale could be anything from the millisecond to minutes. And of course, it'll change over days. But motivation is on a different time scale altogether. Right? So my interest for learning about viruses may change after 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And if it's 2 or 3 weeks, and we're using this, let's say in class today, let's say during a 90-minute block, I'm going to miss that opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Before money, I just kind of practical experience we had. Like, we designed a collaborative task, and it was about running a simulation for running the company, and the task continued like almost 2 hours. And we measured situational self-interest 5 times, and I was so excited, like, oh, this is like great, like 5 times we are measuring process, and we just didn't find any variation between the measurements, and we were just reporting the similar stuff. Like, that was the question in my mind, and like, does it change? Please
does it change? Yeah.
I mean, one question regarding like how old were the participants? And there's another thing.
Higher education students.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because sometimes, like, if you do it with the younger children, they can't really use such rating scales properly. Like, if you're doing it in primary education, what you often see is like these very extreme ratings. If you have set up the normal Likert scale from 1 to 5, but then in the end, like, they're just responding on ones or just fives. So, and what I wanted to say earlier, I think it's like about thinking about the sampling rate.
Yep.
You know, thinking about the actual concept in itself, like how dynamic might it actually be, like how dynamic is the emotional process, or how dynamic is the motivational process, so how often do you need to?
Absolutely. And then you talked about collaborative, like in your setting was collaborative versus individual learner. Right, absolutely, yeah. So lots of open questions. I'm sorry we have to, I'll be, sound like a game show host, I'll be here all week. So be happy to meet and discuss and talk about collaborations, all these questions, and I want to thank you for, you know, for your vivid and critical questions and interactions this morning. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.